On the morning of the 9th of November 1979, a West Lothian forestry worker was following his normal work routine.
It'd be about 11 o'clock I went into the wood, and it was beautiful. It just nice for walking.
This turned out to be far from a normal day in the forest.
It hit the national papers, it hit the national TV that weekend, and it really caused some interest in as far as UFOs were concerned.
Friday the 9th of November was the day an alien craft landed in West Lothian, Scotland. It was seen. It left evidence. Or did it?
I was fairly sceptical at that time. I was certainly very surprised and sceptical that aliens had landed in Livingston. However, I had to put that on one side until I could find more information about the event.
Just be.
If the crew of an alien craft were looking for the least promising human to share an encounter with that day, Bob Taylor would have been high on their list. Now 86, there's been no room for nonsense or wild imaginings in his life. Born in rural Perthshire, Bob Taylor worked as a gardener until the outbreak of war in 1939, when he joined the Fife and Forfarshire Yeomanry as a tank driver.
We went up through France to Belgium and the Netherlands, and then that was the start of the Dunkirk evacuations. So I'm afraid we got chased out there. I was a tank driver. The tank driving is not much different from driving a big lorry, but you got to keep the heat.
Bob was given a return ticket as part of the invasion of Europe in 1944.
I was D-Day +5 when I went out, and fought our way right up through France and Belgium. Eventually, when the war finished, we was at Hamburg.
After the war, with the minimum of fuss, Bob returned home to work as a roadman, and in 1964 he applied to work at Livingston Newtown. The new town was being built in the heart of West Lothian, barely 20 miles from Edinburgh. Even a new town needed forestry workers, and Bob joined up.
It wasn't a commercial forestry, it was just private for the town. I've never really lived in a town, until this Livingston. I was there when the first house was put up, 1964, and I watched it being built.
The town of Livingston grew, but the efforts of the forestry workers remained generally unremarked until that morning in 1979.
I was a foreman forester, you see, and in Livingston, although it was a big town, it still had big pastures with sheep, and so we had to, that was my job first thing, to see that the gates were closed. And that day, I was just walking down between the plants, the trees, and turned a corner, and there was this huge vehicle just sat there in front. I just stared at it for a while. It was immense, and then noticed that there was two objects dropped down from it and made towards me. There were two round balls, and they weren't walking, they were going on spikes. They came towards me on spikes, and they both landed up beside me and gripped me, and it actually tore my trousers, and just passed out. And then I tried to go home and I couldn't walk. I crawled 100 yards at least. I had a Bedford van And I got into the van and I couldn't drive it. I reversed it right into a ditch. And then I had to walk home. I couldn't drive my bed foot. My wife was wondering what on earth would come over because I was all dirty. And I told her I'd been attacked. So she sent for my boss, Mr. Drummond, and he came up to see what was going on. And I told him, well, he says, I'll get another workman and we'll go up and see if there's any traces of it. And of course, they found the traces of it where it had landed.
Bob's wife also called the family doctor.
Well, that morning I was doing the house calls for that part of Livingston, and we received a call at the surgery from his wife saying that this patient had been attacked by a flying saucer, and could we make a house call. So I arranged to do that, and I went up to the house to see him.
And how was he?
Well, he was rather agitated and distressed, but he was able to give me quite a reasonable story about what had happened. I did a complete routine examination of the vital signs, heart and blood pressure, temperature, and lungs and abdomen, and there was no basic physical abnormality to be found. The only thing we could find were 2 marks, abrasions on his legs, one at each side, where his trousers had been torn. And the whole thing did need investigating properly from a medical point of view.
Even in 1979, hospital waiting times could be tiresome. Bangor Hospital is now derelict, but Bob's reluctance to wait could have been encouraged by the view from the hospital window. The dip on the tree line marks the spot where, Dunkirk and Normandy aside, he'd probably had the most scaring experience of his life. Might his visitors still be out there, looking for him? In the meantime, Bob's manager had also had the presence of mind to call the police. Detective Constable Ian Wark, based in Bathgate, was called to the scene.
The officer who led this inquiry was the Divisional Commander, Chief Superintendent David Scott. Now, he was first told of the incident by Livingston Development Corporation, who were the employers of Mr. Taylor. Now, Mr. Scott, like most of us, just found it very, very hard to believe that this UFO had landed in Decament Law that morning. And he took the approach that Mr. Taylor had been assaulted, and therefore we would carry out an investigation into his claim of being assaulted, and that's the route we actually took.
An assault calls for a scene of crime examination, and that was Ian Wark's task.
First of all, when I arrived, the area had been fenced off by Livingston Development Corporation to prevent anybody disturbing any evidence. But I had a good look around and I saw marks on the ground, numerous circles, approximately 3.25 inches in diameter, and marks quite similar to caterpillar tracks. I then made a sketch plan. I also took some photographs, but the sketch plan proved to be a great piece of evidence. Later that day we actually went down to Livingston Development Corporation offices where they keep their machinery, because to be quite honest I thought we could solve this there and then by just examining the marks on the ground with their machinery, but after examining every piece of machinery that they had up there, we didn't find anything to match.
What particularly intrigued Detective Constable Ian Wark was that the unusual marks on the ground were only to be found in the clearing itself.
These marks just arrived. They didn't come from anywhere and didn't go anywhere. They just arrived as though somebody had, like a helicopter, just landed or something had landed from the sky. Definitely didn't lead to anywhere and definitely didn't go anywhere.